Change is a constant. No company or organization can operate the same way forever. Whether you're a rapidly growing startup with dexterity built into your DNA, or a legacy corporation responding to the market shift, you need to evolve to progress and improve. How well you can do that depends on your organization's approach and the process of change management. Join me, Ather Williams III, and my special guest Shane O'Kelly in this episode of Future Intersections presented by Wells Fargo, as we discuss change management, implementing new ways of operating within organizations, improving employee morale through culture and communication, and instituting real changes or accelerating growth. Welcome to Future Intersections. I'm here with Shane O'Kelly. He's a graduate of West Point as well as Harvard Business School, graduate of both the Airborne School and the Army Ranger program in the Army, which is one of the toughest selection courses in all of the U.S. military. So I think there's lots we can explore today with Shane about leadership and managing through change. So Shane, welcome.
Ather, it is great to be here. And the idea that we get to not only catch up personally, but share stories of leadership and talk about our respective companies, really looking forward to today's session.
I remember going back to Nitin Noria, who's most recently was the dean of the Harvard Business School, who recently retired, but he was our leadership professor. You had just gotten out of the Army and showed up to HBS. What made you want to make that transition?
So I think that going to business school and having the opportunity to, in our case, get an MBA is a great vehicle for military people to learn a bit about civilian careers before just jumping in. And one of the challenges of being in the military is you're not exposed to things that in your business career you would consider to be normal everyday activities. And that could be reading a P&L or interacting with customers. For me, the most exciting part about business school was the tremendous variety of perspective that came from the members of our student body. The idea that we'd have a discussion about a company, should they open or close a plant, and you'd have an investment banker say, I ran the model and it doesn't work. You'd have a consultant say, well, we've got to think about these market segments. Maybe somebody from nonprofit saying, well, what about the impact on the town? So for a military member to come in and learn and see that diversity of thought, wonderfully enriching, and certainly provided just a fundamental foundation of how I think about business today.
So, I mean, we've had lots of conversations over the years about your time at West Point. One of the things you always, I don't know if I've ever told you this, that stuck with me, we were talking about understanding where you were in the perspective of the class. And the one thing you said to me that always stuck with me was that since West Point, everything you do is graded. Everything, whether it's, your bed to eating, the classwork to how you march, the whole thing is, everything's graded. And it all gets into a ranking. And if you knew that person was, 1, 2, 15 slots ahead of you in line, they were just better than you.
They're better, yeah.
And that the honesty with which you said that sort of stuck with me as a lesson for leaders around just like really being objective about ourselves as sort of a starting point for leadership. So I don't know what you thought about.
Yeah, great thought. It is the ultimate meritocracy, both in terms of the frequency with which you're graded and the breadth of activities where that grading takes place, as you alluded to, physically, militarily, and academically. And what makes it particularly challenging, and I think this is actually true in business as well, is there's not enough time to do everything you need to do. You have to prioritize. You have to understand where you need to make trade-offs. And so if you think about in the breadth of the business you run, you have so many priorities. How do you make sure that you get the right things focused at the right time and measured to create results for businesses? West Point just did a fabulous job with that. And those lessons around that time management, that prioritization, focusing at the right time, at the right place, stuck with me forever.
Talk to me about your first command. What did that teach you about leadership, having to take those people from different walks of life, different ethnicities, different religions, so to bring them together around common purpose?
My first platoon sergeant was a grizzled leader. He was a Ranger instructor, Sergeant Robert Layton. And when I met with him, I said, help teach me how to do my job. I think in life you have to be careful. Ruling by fiat, by just having the rank on your sleeve, is a dangerous way to go. because if you haven't seen the intricacies of how, in this case, military operations are conducted, you can get over your skis very quickly. And so for me, the idea that I had this enlisted leader who had, I think he was at his 17-year mark, getting him to coach and mentor me, even though I outranked him, was really important. And as I think about that, as I've gone into the business world, as a senior leader, it's very hard to have the depth of technical expertise in all of the areas that go on in your business, and being able to provide the respect and the time and give the due to where the real expertise is, you get to better answers. Whereas if you go in with the I'm in charge, hands on hips approach, you'll end up turning off the platoon and you won't get the result.
What's your most memorable moment of time in the Army?
The U.S. Army's Ranger School, I didn't make it through the first time I went. In the mountain phase in Dahlonega, Georgia, in the winter, it was cold. I didn't pass a patrol that I needed to pass as a leader. So I came out of Ranger School without a Ranger tab, which for a young infantry officer, that tab which you wear on your left shoulder is sort of the hallmark of being known as a leader and being physically tough. And so for me to go back to Ranger School a second time, knowing how tough the course was and getting through it the second time, both in terms of a pivotal moment in the Army, pivotal moment for my career. Everybody's going to have points of failure. It's inevitable. We're all going to have it in different facets. And how you deal with failure matters. Being able to get back on the horse and deal with tough challenges, I think that's an absolute key to long-term success. And for me, getting that Ranger tab, having spent more days in that school than most, is a point of pride.
It's one thing for you as an individual, to dig down deeper and find that extra thing to push you forward, that extra drive. And then it's a almost more complicated thing then to get the man or woman next to you to follow you at that same pace.
Yeah.
And so when I think about you have your tab and you're going to deploy and you are in a mission where you have to get people to do this. How do you translate the lessons of what you did internalize to sort of bring your team along?
I think it was Peter Drucker who said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. I'm going to put ... Culture eats strategy, eats operations, IT. Culture eats all of the functional areas for breakfast. And so whether in a military unit or in a business unit, you've got to create a culture where people subscribe to digging deep individually or being to the left and the right and pushing forward in that mission. They need to believe, which that all is steeped in the culture of the organization, which comes from how you communicate. It comes from how you lead. Some of the things I believe in as it relates to establishing a good culture is the leaders set the example in terms of how they engage, in terms of being present in the business, in terms of being grateful, in terms of being humble.
Talk to me a little bit about the business of HD Supply, who your customers are, and what your team does every day.
So we're HD Supply. We are the wholesale arm of the Home Depot. We're run as a separate company, 12,000 associates, and we go to market in 6 key verticals. Let's say you own an apartment complex. We are a maintenance, repair, and operations company that provides all of those products to those maintenance team members to keep those apartment units in tip-top shape. And we do that both in terms of the day-to-day activities and also if you're going to turn a unit, meaning the tenant is left and you're going to refresh the unit for the next resident. We do that in multifamily. We do that in hospitality. You want to have clean towels and the shampoo bottles. Those are the types of products we supply that help that hotel run. We do it in healthcare. We do it for the trades. We do it for the government. So we are that provider of those maintenance products for those types of buildings. We help our customers serve the people and communities where many Americans live or work, and it's a great business to be in.
So in order to do that, you've got, I'll call it a sales organization, stacked against each of those verticals who are intimately familiar with the needs of those various segments, so whether it's a multifamily housing unit or it's a hotel or it's an office complex, et cetera. And then you have this massive, complicated logistics organization, it sounds like, who's got to figure out how to stock all that stuff and deliver it just in time to all those people, which is an orchestration of people and machinery that's not easy.
Yeah, very well said. We have several thousand salespeople who go and develop personal relationships with the owners and operators of these hotels or apartment complexes. But as you've astutely noted, it's about how you make all that happen. And we have thousands of trucks. We run 180 distribution points, and we move billions of dollars of products, those water heaters and towel bars, to our customers every single day. And by the way, expectations consummately moving up. And the example I always use is you can go online today and order a soccer ball and have that soccer ball come tomorrow. If I can get a soccer ball, how come I can't get my hot water heater? And so our customers are impacted by the technological revolution that's occurring with consumers that's now moved into the B2B space, where our logistics and technology have to be continually improving.
We're in arguably the fifth industrial revolution with artificial intelligence driving this wave. And it's been obviously a huge splash with things like generative AI models and large language models recently, but we're still at the very infancy of this. How do you think about the positive and negatives of what this could mean for the culture and the opportunities it creates, right? So you want to run a lean, mean organization. So there's some of this new technology can be really helpful to doing that. It also has human impact, which I know in my world we think about what that means.
For our business, there's a component which could be pretty interesting. I think AI provides the power of prediction in a huge way. And so prediction for us means anticipating what you as an apartment complex manager might need. In an intermediate world, I can reduce the amount of inventory I need to hold because I already have a good sense of what you're going to order. And so I don't have to hedge because I've got better power of prediction. But in a perfect world, I might even be able to send you the products before you order them. I know that on average, Ather, you're going to have this many water heaters go out. So it's Tuesday, I'm going to send you some water heaters. And you didn't order one, and suddenly Unit 2 calls up and says, I need a water heater. I think there's some very potent capability that comes from that AI will help us in our business, and we'll be able to provide better service to our customers and run the business more effectively. I do think, as you've also alluded to, though, if AI is that good, what happens to all of the people? And I'm a little more conservative here. I do think that in businesses, people make a difference. But as it relates to how I think about it as our team members, I am not viewing this as a manner in which we're going to be reducing the number of team members that we go forward with.
Yeah, and I think that's a difference of how leaders are thinking about this next turn of technology. Because remember back when we were in business school, 25 years ago, it was about efficiency. It was like offshore this, hub that, cut down people costs, get down that OpEx, all that sort of stuff was all part of the mantra. Now I feel like it's, to your point, it's about humans being supported by technology. And I agree with you, and we find that in our financial services, we find that in the financial services business, that in moments that matter, people want to talk to someone. They don't want to talk to a chatbot. They don't want to talk to Fargo. They want to talk to a human being who can have empathy. And it's very hard to teach a machine empathy. So that's definitely one. And then you already touched on the impact technology's had on customers. And so we both have children all in the same age, and so that, teen, preteen, up to young adult stage. And their expectations for life, how things work, how interactions work, how people, what they have a career, are all different. And so when I think about your team members, you're going to have that 18-year-old, their first job, they just graduated high school, their first job is driving a truck or working in sales or operations. It's like we have people who are frontline bankers. How do you think about bringing them into the culture and how what they're going to bring is going to change that culture over time?
Great question. And let's go back. Let's think about you and I early days in the workforce.
Oh, God.
20, 30 years ago, I think when you came out of school, we viewed the workplace hierarchically. And the idea is you start at the bottom and you work your way up. You had to put in the time, and that was just sort of the implicit contract. I think young men and women today, they view it as a series of experiences, and they view it with the lens of, I understand that I have to put some work in, but there also should be something in it for me. We now think about our company as one where, regardless of who you are, you can be you. I've coined that expression. More definitively, we basically say we want everybody to be their full, authentic self at work. And that didn't exist when you and I came up.
Definitely did not.
But here's why I like it. The idea that in the past, if you came to work and you weren't yourself and you had to conform to the norms that you thought that this workplace wanted to see, you're never going to be happy. You're never going to be able to give your true best to that company. And as I think about that across a broad base of associates and their respective identities and interests, if they don't have to abandon that when they come to work, then they're going to be better at work, and that's good for business.
You and I have the good fortune of, while seeing things over a couple of decades, being a little more open-minded about things. We're all going to have people in our organizations who aren't. And so when we think about being the leader, the buck stops with you, and the culture, people should, emulate what you do, what you bring to the workplace. What if they don't? How do you deal with that as a leader?
So the first is I lead by example. Now the challenge that you've pressed me on, I think, is difficult, because for folks who don't subscribe to it, ultimately, I don't think there's a place. And part of what I think makes an effective leadership team is, beyond the inclusion, is you have to have similarities on key cultural components. And I think it's one of those things that you want to have differences in opinion, absolutely. But when it comes to sort of plank foundational components of what creates a culture, I think having a significant dichotomy in terms of how people think that, I think that's something where you look to move on getting different leaders in a position.
I'm happy to hear you describe it that way, because it's validating for me. So when I sit down with my team, whenever I take over a new team or new organization, I start with basically a placemat that's founded around a thing called the way forward. It's like, this is how we're all going forward together, and it gets to, not the rules to your point, but I'll use your term, the norms of how we're going to operate. If you're at the table, you're here for a reason, have a voice. If you're not going to have a voice, don't be at the table.
That's a great one.
There's also things about the creative conflict. We're gonna disagree, and we need to do that openly. There's no meeting after the meeting. And then when we leave this room, we're gonna stack hands and commit. Because, unfortunately, or if not, this is not a democracy. Like, we're gonna make a decision, and we're all gonna line up behind it. But we're not gonna have passive aggressive behavior. And so there's, and I use that under the analogy of, a fist is stronger than 5 fingers. And so there's things that I think that we have to do to line people up, to say, like, this is how we're gonna work. And if you don't wanna do this, opt out now.
In a past life, and now with this integration, and I've done 34 acquisitions and integrations, it's taken me a while to get to this, but I have a no jerks rule, because we had a dysfunctional leadership team in a previous organization, where if you have somebody who's not exhibiting exactly, you and I think exactly alike on this, in terms of how those meetings should go, it really is incredibly unproductive. And the thing you have to remember, in a big organization, what happens with the 10 or so people that say are in a key staff meeting or decision meeting with you, each of them have 5, 8, 10 reports, and it goes down. So you're turning these gears that end up spinning very, very quickly for the men and women on the front line. And so when you've got a lack of productivity here, it's incredibly detrimental there. And so, like you, if you're at the table, you have to speak up. You have to share your perspective. And it has to be the no jerks rule. What that does is lets people be comfortable with dissent. Because when I disagree with you, I'm not disagreeing with you personally. I'm not bringing an edge to this. I'm not doing it in a disparaging manner. And there's trust and respect. And then I always take input from the key leaders. And back to your fist analogy, we make that decision, we stack hands, and we go execute it. When you have jerks or passive aggressive folks, they nod along and they're like, "Oh, you wouldn't believe the meeting we had today. Don't worry about that initiative. We're not really going to push it down here in this geography." You can't have it. You cannot run a company in that fashion.
So I think back to some point you made early on in this conversation when you were talking about your platoon sergeant. And so I think the thing that struck me when you were telling that story was at a very young age, you realized one of the key things I think of leadership is you made yourself vulnerable. You're like, hey, I know I outrank you, but I need you to help me be a better me, which a lot of people don't have the courage to do. So I applaud you for, at a very young age, understanding that and embracing that.
I've had so many instances in my career where people have provided the perspective and they've been right, and I'm so much better for it, both in terms of the decisions we make and how I look in terms of my legitimacy as a leader. The company performs better, people feel better about it, and they feel valued. They know that they can raise their hand and say, "Here's how this could go or should go." That's a norm that just creates better companies.
I think that's a critical point. And I know it resonates in our industry as well, because I know we think about the most senior person in a particular line of business was always the person that started here and worked their way up and knew the whole thing. But part of my challenge and my, sort of my remit is to bring people along and say, hey, look, your experience is valuable, but some of it's dated. There's things that carry over, but you have to continue to learn and grow. It's creating that integrated team where that team member has been with you for 6 weeks, or that person who's the expert, it's now their turn to lead because they're the experts, not because of the stripes on my shoulder or the bars on my collar. It's about, no, this person's the expert. We need to listen to them, and everyone has a role, and being humble enough and accepting enough of an environment to change is where we have to pivot.
So a couple of quick thoughts on that. One for us is the definition of who the customer is evolving. So we talked about a circumstance where you're a salesperson, you visit an apartment complex, to sell a water heater for unit 2 that needs that water heater. Well, what if the apartment complex implemented a new software system where they gave the maintenance tech an iPad? And on the maintenance tech, an alert would come up from a tenant that says, hey, my water heater's out. And the maintenance tech would go and would take a picture and fill out a work order. And by the way, on that work order could be a button that says, order water heater, and we get that order. Now, the company that developed that application is going to need to interface with our company. And by the way, there's a good chance they're going to say, well, hey, Shane, if we make you the primary button for order water heater now versus a competitive company, perhaps there'd be some economics in it for us. What if I was able to be on every single maintenance app iPad in the country where order now always goes to us? Is that applicant developer, is that application developer, is that a customer? Is that person a threat?
Mm-hmm.
Can I go around them? Do I need to embrace them? That's an example of what we currently face in the business today that didn't exist.
So if I think about the scenario you laid out, that piece of software that the maintenance manager is using it's a channel that you have to interface to. But ultimately, when the hot water heater doesn't show up, they're not calling ABC Tech Company and saying, "Where's my hot water heater?" They're going, "Shane, where's my hot water heater?" And so you have to figure out now, but how to manage that customer relationship and I'll use the word you used earlier, in a broader ecosystem, which requires a different set of skills as an organization than you previously had. Some of that is definitely the product management piece and definitely the focus on IT.
Yeah, and I see more of it in more places, which is why I think as a leader, back to always being willing to learn and knowing that you can learn from lots of different sources that perhaps you previously wouldn't have thought about, and then the ability to adjust your company's processes and direction. I think that's the key piece. I don't want to be the company that's building landline telephones when everybody else is on a cell phone or whatever's
Next.
next. And I think that's where you'll see the difference between companies that evolve and thrive and companies that wither as we go forward.
Awesome. Well, Shannon, it's a good point for us to. I could talk to you for hours about
Yeah.
this stuff. But again, thank you for joining us today. I think you've had some great insights for the audience. But I think that one, just the arc of your career and what you've been able to achieve, I've been really proud of you. So I remember you showing up in business school and
Yeah.
you're kind of like, what's going on here? And then to watch you take your natural ability to lead and your curiosity and your humility and grow into the CEO that you are today. But thank you for joining us today, and thank you for all the insights around leadership and managing through change.
Yeah, very kind. Wonderful to be here. Wells is an iconic brand. I saw the Stagecoach this morning, and if you think about the origins of that to what you're doing today, what you'll lead with payments now going forward, exciting future, and amazing that your company has made those evolutionary, in some cases revolutionary changes to be a preeminent bank for our country for the future. So grateful, appreciative, wonderful to be here.
Thank you, Shane.